The definitive biography of Elon Musk, Isaacson S. 2023 book, is 688 pages long, and I've read it more times than I want to admit. But here's what's fascinating. The more you sit with that book, the more obvious something becomes. Beneath the noise, beneath the controversies, beneath the headlines and the memes, there is a pattern to how Elon thinks. A repeatable psychological architecture that shows up across decades, across companies, across industries. Before we dive in, make sure you subscribe, because every week we break down the minds of history's greatest builders and extract the principles you and I can actually use today. Now, here's what I want to do with this episode. I want to chip away everything that is not essential. The Twitter storms, the celebrity drama, the political commentary, and get to the core of how Elon Musk takes ideas that look impossible, insane, or flat out ridiculous, and turns them into companies that end up shaping the direction of entire industries. And to do that, I went back not only to Isaacson's biographies, but also to Ashley Vance's Elon Musk. Countless interviews, court records from Tesla's early days, oral histories from ex-PayPal founders, internal SpaceX memos, and even the obscure engineering notes Elon scribbled on whiteboards at 3 a.m. during the early Falcon failures. When you zoom out far enough, a blueprint emerges, a mental operating system with a few unbreakable components. A warlike relationship with problem solving, a compulsive need to confront obstacles directly, an obsession with first principles, thinking a refusal to obey industry assumptions, a superhuman tolerance for risk, and above all, an ability to impose his internal reality onto the external world. But none of that makes sense until you understand where it started. Most people think Elon began his journey as a tech genius. He didn't. He began as an outsider, a kid isolated, bullied, ignored, and underestimated in apartheid-era South Africa. Isaacson describes him as the boy who disappeared into worlds he created for himself, often reading science fiction for hours a day until he could recite entire passages from Asimov, Douglas Adams. And here's the crucial piece. Those books didn't just entertain him. They formed his worldview. They taught him that the future had to be imagined before it could be built, that technology determines the trajectory of humanity, that progress is not inevitable. It requires sacrifice, and that individuals, not institutions, move civilization forward. That's the soil his mind grew in. By the time he arrived in Canada at 17, alone, broke, sleeping in cheap rooms and working odd jobs, he already had an operating system most people don't develop in a lifetime. And that operating system only got sharper in college, where he became obsessed with strategy games. Isaacson tells the story of Elon spending entire nights playing diplomacy, not for fun, but because it trained pattern recognition, resource allocation, alliances, betrayal, long-term thinking. Elon once told a friend, "I think I'm wired for war." And if you follow his life chronologically, you start to understand exactly what he meant. This wasn't a metaphor, it was a prediction. Because Elon doesn't approach problems like an entrepreneur. He approaches them like a general. When you study Elon's early adulthood chronologically through Isaacson's notes, the papal oral histories and interviews with his college friends, you start to see the first formation of the psychological engine he still uses today. And it all begins with the principle that once you see it, you can't unsee it. Elon does not wait for permission from reality. He imposes his will on it. And that trait shows up long before rockets, Tesla factories, or Neuralink surgeries. Let's go back to his years at the University of Pennsylvania. Most students go to class, study for exams, maybe join a club or two. Elon didn't do normal. His friends describe him as living inside a constant mental war room. He read physics textbooks for fun. He studied economics not for grades, but for leverage. And the most telling detail repeated by 3 different classmates is that Musk believed deeply that the future was not something that happened to you. It was something you built. This is where you see the first hints of his later pattern. Obsession, immersion, monomania, and a complete inability to do anything halfway. Ashley Vance writes that Elon didn't just read, he devoured entire shelves. Robotics, propulsion, electromagnetism, cold gas thrusters, orbital mechanics, solar energy, battery chemistry. It didn't matter. If he thought a subject mattered for the future, he inhaled every page he could find. And then comes one of the most important moments of his entire life, the moment that shapes everything we know today. Elon realizes that the greatest leverage in the world is not money. It's engineering. This is something that comes up again and again in Isaacson's biography. Elon didn't want to be a businessman. That part almost annoyed him. What he wanted was power. Not political power, not social power, but technological power. The power to change the physical world. And once he realized that engineering was the ultimate tool for reshaping the future, everything changed. His ambitions expanded, his risk tolerance exploded, his worldview hardened. But here's where we get to the part most people miss. Elon built his impossible companies using a decision-making system he had already developed in college. There are 3 pillars to this system, and you see them literally everywhere in his career. 1, first principles thinking. The deconstruction method Elon learned to take a problem, smash it to the atomic level, and rebuild it from physics instead of convention. What are the laws of the universe? What does science say is possible? Everything else is negotiation. This is how he built rockets 10x cheaper. This is how he redesigned automotive manufacturing. This is how he forced battery costs down decades ahead of schedule. He wasn't innovative. He was fundamental. 2, blitzkrieg execution. The war room method. Elon doesn't scale slowly. He doesn't experiment cautiously. He doesn't follow industry maturity curves. He concentrates bodies, machines, capital engineering, talent, pressure, deadlines into one place until the impossible bends. It's a military doctrine applied to factories. 3, reality distortion through sheer force of belief. This is a trait he shares with Jobs, with Edison, with Walt Disney, with Howard Hughes. But Elon uses it differently. Employees call it the vortex. He believes the impossible is inevitable, and his belief is so absolute that people get pulled into it against their own skepticism. A SpaceX engineer once said, "You come in thinking something can't be done. 2 hours with Elon, and you feel stupid for ever doubting it." This is not charisma. It's psychological gravity. And when you place these 3 pillars together, you get the answer to the question this episode is trying to solve. How does Elon Musk turn impossible ideas into trillion-dollar industries? By using a mind designed to reject limits, reduce problems to physics, and advance on targets with military intensity. This is the architecture, and we're only getting started because Zip2 is about to show us the first real field test. By the time Elon Musk co-founded Zip2 in 1995, his mental operating system was already built. But Zip2 is the first time we get to see it in action. Not in theory, not in classrooms, not in late-night debates with roommates, but in the real world, under pressure, with no money, no investors, no status, and no safety net. And this is where the biography becomes cinematic. Isaacson describes young Elon and his brother Kimball renting a small office in Palo Alto, buying a single computer, and sleeping on beanbags beside it. They showered at the YMCA, they lived off cheap takeout, and Elon coded through the night. Not late nights the way normal people say it, but literal 24-hour stretches with no breaks except Diet Coke and video games. This is the first time the world gets to see what will later be known as Elon mode. And what's striking is not the hustle. Lots of founders work hard. It's the intensity of focus. The kind of obsession that compresses years of progress into months. Let me highlight a few patterns that show up in Zip2 and repeat across his entire career. Elon treated Zip2 like a war scenario. Not a startup. Every early employee interviewed by Isaacson or Vance describes the exact same environment. No hierarchy, no excuses, no fixed schedule, no off switch, no boundaries. Just a single, relentless question. What needs to be solved next? If someone hesitated, it's gone. If someone slowed the team, reassigned. If someone doubted the goal, ignored. This is not harshness. This is how Elon thinks. In his mind, Zip2 wasn't a company. It was a mission, digitize business directories, map cities, and build an online infrastructure long before Google Maps existed. Everyone else was running a startup. Elon was running a campaign. 2, Elon's first real use of showmanship is salesmanship. Isaacson includes one of the great early Musk stories. Zip2 needed to convince investors they had serious technical infrastructure. They didn't. So Elon bought a huge frame meant for a large server tower and placed their tiny computer inside it. Investors walked in and thought they were seeing a supercomputer. Elon understood something profound. A dramatic demonstration is a psychological shortcut. It collapses doubt. It creates momentum. It turns maybes into yeses. You see this again later. The Roadster revealed the Falcon 1 launch landing rockets on barges, the Cybertruck demo, the Neuralink monkey video. Elon knows that engineering alone doesn't win. Narrative does. Elon already had a no middlemen philosophy. Even in the 90s, Elon couldn't stand intermediaries. He believed companies should build directly, sell directly, control their infrastructure, eliminate friction, move faster than distributors and partners allow. This is the same instinct that led to Tesla's direct sales model, SpaceX building its own engines, Starlink manufacturing its own terminals, Neuralink designing its own surgical robot. It all traces back to Zip to a kid in a rented office, already insisting we should control the entire stack. For Elon's obsessive detail checking appears instantly to different early Zip to employees told biographers the same thing. There's no such thing as your job if you worked with Elon. He would redo your code, rewrite your UI, sit over your shoulder, question every assumption, demand exactness, demand speed, demand solutions, not because he distrusted people, but because his brain runs a constant background process. What is the bottleneck right now? That instinct find bottleneck attack. Bottleneck eliminate bottleneck becomes the through line of every $1 trillion idea he later builds. Zip2 eventually sold for over $300 million, giving Elon $22 million at the age of 27. But the important part isn't the price tag, it's the pattern. Because after Zip2, Elon does the exact same thing every great founder does. He takes every dollar he earned and puts it at risk again. Not for comfort, not for ego, for the next problem. And that next problem, online payments, will reveal an entirely new dimension of how his mind works. If Zip2 was the first glimpse into Elon's operating system, X.com, the company that eventually became PayPal, is where that system begins to look outright dangerous. Not dangerous in the reckless sense, but dangerous in the high leverage sense. This is where you see the mental patterns that later build rockets, self-driving cars, global internet constellations, and brain-computer interfaces. Because when Elon walked away from Zip2 with $22 million at age 27, he didn't do what most people would do. He didn't buy property. He didn't stash the cash. He didn't diversify his portfolio. He wired $12 million, more than half his net worth, straight into a brand new, unproven idea, a fully online financial institution that merged payments, banking, investing, and insurance into one system. Isaacson describes the move simply. He bet the house again, and PayPal becomes one of the most revealing chapters of Elon's mind, because the stakes were higher, the team was stronger, and the conflicts were brutal. You get to see how he behaves under pressure when the battlefield is crowded with other talented founders, Max Levchin, Peter Thiel, David Sachs, Reid Hoffman, each with their own vision. Let's break down a few patterns that appear at PayPal and reappear for the rest of Musk's life. 1. Elon operates with a total technical understanding philosophy. This is where his obsession with engineering really crystallizes. Employees at X, Com, and later, PayPal repeatedly said the same thing. Elon didn't just want to run the company, he wanted to understand the code base, the database, the UI, the APIs, the encryption, the security protocols, the server infrastructure. One engineer said, "You'd explain something to Elon thinking he couldn't possibly grasp the details, and then he'd correct your math." This is important because it becomes one of Elon's lifelong advantages. He refuses to lead anything he cannot explain. Rockets, autonomous driving, gigafactory machines, neural implants, all of it eventually gets forced through his brain. To Elon's war mentality shows up in managementx.com was not collaborative in the traditional sense. It was confrontational, volatile, fast, borderline insane, but productive. Isaacson describes it perfectly. He managed like he was fighting a battle he couldn't afford to lose. Deadlines were insane. Servers ran hot. Coders slept at their desks. Meetings were war rooms. And Elon, he lived inside that chaos with absolute intensity. The same intensity he later brings to rocket recovery and Tesla production. Hell. 3. Elon believed financial infrastructure should be rebuilt from first principles. Everyone else in fintech treated banks as permanent institutions. Elon treated banks as legacy architecture. He kept asking the same question over and over again. If we started from physics and math instead of history, how would money work? That question is the seed of PayPal, Tesla's direct-to-consumer model, SpaceX's launch economics, Starlink's global ISP disruption. Neuralink's neurosurgery robot, he doesn't ask, how is it done? He asks, what must be true? For Elon has a compulsion to delete complexity. This is one of the most repeated behaviors in the biography. He constantly demanded fewer steps, fewer screens, fewer keystrokes, fewer dependencies, fewer committees, fewer layers, fewer blockers, Isaacson notes. If something required more than one click, Elon wanted to know why. This obsession later becomes Tesla's most important manufacturing philosophy: delete, simplify, accelerate. 5. He could transfer belief. Like a force of nature, there's a moment in the PayPal era that every employee remembers. The servers were failing. Fraud was exploding. Burn rate was insane. The company was weeks from death. But Elon stood in front of the team and said, this'll work. We will win. There is no scenario where we lose. People said it was irrational. People said it was delusional. But the crazy part, it worked. Because Elon's belief doesn't motivate people, it overrides their doubt. This is the same psychological force he later uses to convince NASA to trust a startup with rockets, global suppliers to bet on Tesla customers to pre-order cars that didn't exist, engineers to land boosters on drone ships, investors to support Mars colonization. PayPal was not a payment company. It was Elon's first demonstration of psychological gravity. And once PayPal was acquired, giving it $180 million. He did the same thing he did after Zip2. He pulled every chip off the table and shoved everything into the next impossible idea. And the next idea wasn't a website. It was a rocket. When Elon sold PayPal in 2002, his share was worth about $180 million. And once again, just like after Zip2, he risked everything. Within 18 months, he would invest $100 million into SpaceX, $70 million into Tesla, and $10 million into solar. He left himself with almost no liquid cash, just belief. That's how deeply Elon commits to his vision. This is where the second half of his mind comes into full view. The systems architect who doesn't just want to build products, but civilizations. SpaceX wasn't about rockets. Tesla wasn't about cars. Solar City wasn't about panels. They were all pieces of one interconnected system, a sustainable, multiplanetary human species. And to understand how he pulls this off, how he takes ideas that sound insane and turns them into trillion-dollar industries, you have to understand what I call the iron loop. This is Elon's three-step process that turns imagination into industry. He redefines the problem to its core physics. When most people face an impossible idea, they think, who else has done this? What are the best practices? What's the standard cost? Elon's mind goes in the opposite direction. What are the laws of physics that govern this? That's how he discovered what he called the idiot index, the ratio between a product's cost and the raw materials it's made from. In aerospace, rockets were being built with an idiot index of 50x. That means the raw material cost was about 2% of the final price. Elon saw that and thought, that's insane. We can build this cheaper. We can build this ourselves. That single insight, born from physics and cost calculation, led to SpaceX's vertical integration model, which now dominates the global launch market. 2, he builds war factories, not companies at Tesla. And now XI, Elon doesn't build traditional corporate structures. He builds war rooms disguised as factories. He brings together engineering, design, and manufacturing under one roof, literally forcing people to collide with problems. He calls it tight feedback loops. His analogy is brutal and brilliant. If your hand is on a stove, you pull it away. But if it's someone else's hand, it takes longer to react. So, at Tesla, the hand and the heat are in the same room. Every engineer can walk up to the designer and ask, why the hell did you make it this way? That's why innovation happens so fast. There's no delay, no buffer, no distance between failure and correction. 3, he obsessively compresses time. One of Elon's most extreme habits, repeated by every single biographer, is his hatred of time waste. He pushes deadlines that seem impossible. If it's 12 months, he cuts it to 6. If it's 6, he cuts it to 3. And when engineers tell him it's impossible, he says, good. Now let's find a way to make it possible. Half of SpaceX's breakthroughs, reusable boosters, simultaneous landings, cost per launch drops were born out of this time compression. Even when they miss deadlines, they still move faster than everyone else. One engineer said, Elon's timelines are wrong, but his urgency is right. And that right there is the real secret to Elon's trillion-dollar empire. He bends time and physics through willpower. He starts with first principles, builds war factories around the problem, and attacks time itself as the enemy. But the final piece, the emotional core that makes him unstoppable, doesn't come from logic. It comes from pain. And that's what we'll explore next. If you followed Elon Musk's life chronologically from the bullied kid to the obsessive college strategist, to the sleep-deprived zip decoder, to the combative PayPal founder, to the unflinching SpaceX and Tesla leader, you eventually reach a moment where everything clicks into place, because there is one final component of his mind that explains why Elon keeps doing the impossible. And it's not intelligence, it's not vision, it's not engineering talent, it's not charisma, it's pain tolerance at a level that is almost abnormal. This is the part of the biography that most people don't talk about, but every insider whispers about. It's the engine behind everything he risks, everything he builds, everything he refuses to quit, even when quitting would be rational. Let me show you what I mean. The 2008 collapse is defining ordeal. This is the single greatest stress test of Elon's life. The chapter that Isaacson, Vance, and nearly every former employee described the same way. He was broke. Both companies were failing, and he refused to accept defeat. Tesla was weeks away from bankruptcy. SpaceX had failed its first 3 launches. The 4th launch had to succeed or the company would die. He had burned through almost his entire PayPal fortune. He was living off loans from friends. He was going through a brutal divorce. The press was mocking him. Investors wouldn't return his calls. Most people break under even one of those pressures. Elon was carrying all of them at once. And yet, he kept going. He slept under his desk. He yelled at engineers while crying from exhaustion. He micromanaged every subsystem. He pushed until the impossible gave way. On September 28, 2008, Falcon 1 reached orbit. It was the moment that saved SpaceX, saved Tesla, saved everything. And here's the detail Isaacson includes that most people miss. When employees asked him how he didn't collapse, he said, "If something is important enough, you keep going. Even if the odds are against you, even if everyone else quits." That sentence is the emotional blueprint of his mind. Elon's pain tolerance is not a side trait. It's the core of his operating system. You cannot build rockets that land dev companies from scratch, global satellite networks, brain implant, AI labs, trillion-dollar ecosystems, and attempt multi-planetary civilization without a near-inhuman ability to endure suffering. And Elon embraces it. He says it outright, "I don't think most people want to be me. My life is not comfortable. I don't ever turn off." He is not driven by comfort. He is driven by compulsion. 3. The cycle of his mind. The harder it gets, the more engaged he becomes. SpaceX nearly failing. He becomes more focused. Tesla falling apart in production hell. He moves into the factory, Neuralink failing safety tests. He demands nightly revisions, Twitter burning down after acquisition. He basically lives in HQ. Employees describe it as the surge. When things get impossible, Elon enters a mode that is terrifying to watch and impossible not to follow. One former SpaceX engineer said, "If Elon senses the mission is in danger, he becomes 10x scarier and 10x more inspiring." That paradox, fear, and inspiration fused together is the essence of how he builds trillion-dollar companies. For the final pattern, Elon turns personal suffering into industrial acceleration. This is the part nobody copies because nobody can. When Elon hurts, the company accelerates. When Elon is under pressure, innovation spikes. When Elon is cornered, breakthroughs appear. When Elon is attacked, he works harder. This is his superpower. And his curse, his companies don't scale because he delegates. His companies scale because he absorbs more pain and more responsibility than any single human being should. Every biography circles back to the same conclusion. Elon Musk doesn't turn impossible ideas into trillion-dollar industries because he's fearless. He does it because he's willing to suffer more for the mission than anyone else in the room. And that willingness, that relentless, obsessive refusal to break is the operating system behind Tesla, Starlink, Neuralink, and whatever comes next. This is what it looks like when one person decides the future is their responsibility.